Hi, everyone. I want to thank the C.A.R.E Symposium for inviting Urban Health Group, Inc. to be a part of this very important discussion around how we can build resilience through trauma-informed care. And that's within our organizations, but ultimately the people that we're serving. My name is Leticia Vaca Williams. I am the founder and CEO of Urban Health Group, Inc. We are a healthcare practice that helps Black, Indigenous people of color with healthcare navigation and connected mental health support. We also provide trauma-informed supports to organizations around employee wellness and consulting. I've been in the field of social work for over 20 years now, and my experience has ranged from nonprofits to for-profits, human services, mental health, and also directly in the healthcare industry. But my own experience of loss is what informs my work. Having multiple family members deal with a number of both health, mental health, substance abuse issues, legal issues, even at times immigration status issues is what informs my work. And I never want to lose that human part of myself that has led me to wanting to support others. I specialize as a trauma therapist and provide support around healthcare professionals, so medical psychotherapy, really helping the folks supporting systems with the burnout that comes with having employees that service community-facing organizations. So folks who, like yourself, are either in the healthcare field or in the social service field. That's really where my greatest skill set comes into place. But ultimately, I enjoy working with people struggling with day-to-day life struggles, being able to untangle some things, feel a little bit more relief and navigating this thing called life. I believe in people and I believe in communities. Anytime I have an opportunity to talk in non-traditional settings around things that we talk about in the industry are really what drive me, where we're using our platform, our expertise beyond the field and talking to folks who may or may not have this information that really could be transformative in our lives as professionals, but also in our lives just as human beings on this earth. So some of the things that we're going to talk about really quickly is what is trauma? We're going to be talking about resiliency and how we can build resilience through trauma-informed care. So what is trauma? Sometimes folks think about a single event or what they call the big T's that can be like a car accident, sexual assault. It could be what we're seeing in our news now of wartime, even some of the things that we're seeing across the nation as it pertains to population-specific folks. So issues that are facing directly and impacting, survivors of human trafficking, also the LGBTQ community. So we think about these as these big, news headlines, but it's not necessarily the event itself. Trauma is really about what we experience when very stressful, frightening, or distressing events that are difficult to cope with and may feel out of our control. So trauma is really about our emotional experience about what we're witnessing or what happens to us directly. That's why sometimes folks can feel traumatized by what they're seeing on the news, even though they can be in a completely different country. Even if they've never experienced the tragedy or the concern directly, that folks can begin to actually feel it emotionally themselves. So it's anytime there's a stressful, an overwhelmingly stressful, scary, or distressing event, we have to consider that that is a trauma response, that that person may be experiencing the effects of that event. Now, a lot of times when, as a therapist, when we're exploring trauma responses, it looks so different from person to person. So it's hard to say, well, they're not that impacted, or they didn't look traumatized to me. That when we're thinking about what we're witnessing as providers, it's not always overt and clear. That sometimes there's immediate responses and sometimes there's delayed responses depending on that individual and how they process. So that's some folks who have they appear calm, cool, and collected right after a car accident. But 3 months later, they're having nightmares still, and they have fear about getting in the car again, or they develop an anxiety, or there's some people who are completely dysregulated right after an event happens. Having also been an advocate of sexual assault response on the assault response team, we know that victims of sexual abuse have a varying amount of different reactions immediately right after an event. And so we want to be mindful about our own judgment about what we're seeing. So what you see here is a list of the different ways that folks can have a trauma response. That can look like an emotional reaction, a physical reaction, a cognitive reaction. And there's actually more. There's existential, there's some other experiences that folks have, but just for the sake of like the screen and time, I wanted to make sure that you can see that immediate emotional responses can look like anger. So when people are irritability, that we're working with, if we only assess that they are difficult to work with, they're having they are unruly, or be careful when you walk into that room. We really need to be mindful about what we're witnessing and how we're prepping ourselves to service people. So when we're witnessing these immediate responses, it's okay to acknowledge it, but we also need to acknowledge that that is that person's emotional expression about what they directly experience as overwhelmingly stressful, frightening, or scary. There's also some physical reactions. So some people have muscle tremors. They can become nauseous. So maybe they could talk to you fine and then they're throwing up, or I just don't feel good and need to go to the hospital. And then there's also the cognitive reactions that people have, difficulty concentrating. This may look like a student who is having a difficult time following along in class, or even an adult who is having a hard time focusing at work. Now, we know that there's some immediate reaction, but these can turn into longer term issues. And that's why we want to be mindful about what happens later. What comes when the person has not been supported. It can look like a moody person who's unstable. It can look like someone who's, oh, they're very sensitive, right? You got to watch what you say. Well, you probably should watch what you're saying. This can look like a person who has sleep disturbances, and it's a very common thing that we talk about amongst our friends, colleagues, around I'm a night owl, or I only got 3 hours of sleep. When a person is having that much disruption of sleep, we want to also look at how is that impacting their performance, how they feel about themselves, and just overall how they're showing up. Also, an unintended response to trauma can be those aches and pains, things that maybe are not happening in the mind or in the body emotionally. It could be a person that's like, wow, my back has been hurting, my arthritis is flaring up, my gout. So there's so many different ways that folks emote after having a traumatic experience. And I want to go back to this to say it's not always one event. There's some people who have had decades of ongoing, difficult, scary, terrifying experiences. This can look like folks who live in a violent neighborhood. It can look like folks who live in an under-resourced community around their exposure and occurrences of these type of challenges. Now, it's one thing to talk about trauma, right? The other thing is what can we do about it? And what is resilience? So resilience really is a superpower that is really evident in a lot of our communities, especially our underserved, under-resourced communities. So it's sometimes in the medical model, we can look at the injury and say, oh, that person has cancer, or that person has a broken leg, or they're living with heart failure, but it really doesn't allow us to see what's actually going well with that person and how they're able to move through their day and move through their life. That the resilience part is something that's not studied enough, and not enough initiatives to be able to enhance what actually is going well, even for a person who's experienced traumatic events. So resilience is a way that a person adapts in the face of adversity, trauma, and tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress. So it's a way that people adapt. You can never consider someone resilient if they have never gone through a hard time. You cannot use that word to describe a person who has not experienced tragedy, threats, or some significant sources of stress and loss. So that word is only reserved for folks who have had a hard time. Now, I don't want to actually like praise it so much, but it is important that we look at the way that folks are adapting to their circumstances. We know this to be true if we look at certain celebrities around their ability to adapt well. And you may have heard some stories here at the symposium around how folks have adapted and continued on to live a quality of life, right? So just because you have experienced a trauma or ongoing difficulties, that does not have to be indicative of your whole life. It does not have to characterize a person. So we want to look at resilience as a tool to address what we know a lot of folks are experiencing. Now, I like this image of one of the cultural practices in New Orleans is the second line. The first line usually is the funeral. So the second line is the celebration of life, which comes from a West African tradition, and that we could begin to pair um, what we know are difficult, challenging times with acts of celebration, with acts of intention, really carving it into the culture of our organizations, and even us as individuals in our lives, where we know that we have gone through a hard time, that the body and the mind wants respite. The body and mind are asking for care. And music, dance, community for particular cultures is really valuable. So being able to learn for yourself, for your own culture, or the culture of others, that you can begin to take some pieces to see how it can help you adapt well in the face of challenges. Now, highly resilient people consistently find a way to change course, emotionally heal, and continue moving towards their goals. Now, we also know when folks don't have certain, when it's been more challenging to change course, and more difficult to emotionally heal and move towards their goals, these tend to be folks who are unsupported or have faced some backlash when trying to seek support. So as organizations and individuals, we can really help one another change the course of our life to move towards more positive quality of life, and helping folks be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So highly resilient people, sometimes it's innate, it's something that's already in that person, but we could begin to build systems and communities and cultures around how we help ourselves and others change course and emotionally heal. Now, the trauma response is a very normal response to abnormal experiences. So the fact that folks are emoting or having a challenge to begin with is a very natural, normal response to some difficult experiences. So I don't want to, kind of change the fact that, oh, we're seeing someone cry or super dysregulated or super moody, that's a negative. No, it's actually normal but over periods of time, it could become extremely harmful for that individual. And when we think about family systems, if a mom or dad are having a challenge, how does that impact the rest of the family? And so that's something that we need to consider is for how long, right? For how long are we okay with letting folks go along unsupported? According to a national survey, and one of the ways that this has been studied is the ACEs studies. They've looked at negative adverse childhood experiences and saw that there was a strong relationship with exposure to traumatic experiences in childhood, how it really can lead to health risks as you get older. So it's not just that the child is a child, they're not going to remember that what happens in our upbringing, what continues to shape our nervous system, our perspectives, our mentality, our experiences, our worldview can really cause some long-term actually health issues. We see that in heart failure in certain communities. And so among the population where they studied is of half of the nation's youth aged 17 and under have experienced at least one serious childhood trauma. This equates to about 35 million children. So we're not just talking about these one-off these newspaper headline stories. There are millions of people in childhood who have experienced at least one event. We're not even talking about folks who have had ongoing traumatic experiences, how it has shaped uh, not just their quality of life, but literally their physical health. So trauma-informed care is one way that we as individuals and organizations can help build resilience. And it goes both ways, resilience within my approach and being able to support a greater need of folks who have some issues that require acute care, but also building stronger communities. And I think ultimately that's what we're all leaning towards. A trauma-informed approach to care acknowledges that healthcare organizations and care teams need to have a complete picture of that person's life situation, both past and present. A lot of times we're making quick judgments, there's biases, and a lot of times limited on time. But if we are not taking into account the full picture of this person, then we have missed opportunities to build resilience. And so we're really suggesting that in order to provide quality, effective healthcare with the healing orientation, it really needs to include taking that time to consider the fuller picture, the whole person, when we're dealing and trying to provide supportive services. So there's some guiding principles that you can look at the CDC around how do we do that? How do we provide a trauma informed approach to care? So I'll talk really quickly about some of these elements, but I'll talk about why it could potentially cause a barrier. So 1 is safety, 2 is trustworthiness and transparency, 3 is support, 4 is collaboration and mutuality, 5 is empowerment, voice, and choice, and 6 is cultural, historical, and gender issues. So these are some principles that should be included when you're considering how to implement a trauma-informed approach. Safety. It has not always been historically emotionally safe to share with others what's going on with you, right? That requires a level of vulnerability where folks have been exploited. Trustworthiness and transparency. As organizations, we have not always built trust, and there's actually a history of mistrust and exploitation and harm that has been caused by folks seeking support, whether that be for mental health or navigating their healthcare needs. Peer support. We know a lot of times people, especially in culturally specific groups, don't share what's going on. So there's minimal opportunities to receive the benefits of community around how to manage for example, how to manage diabetes, or how to manage COPD, or how to manage living with bipolar or a depressive disorder. Collaboration. We know that a lot of service organizations operate in silos and we don't always cross over. So there's so many gaps and pitfalls that happen. But if we start with one, safety, am I a safe person that people can come to with some of their most difficult challenges? That's something you can ask yourself. Has our organization set up a safety portal for folks to be able to be forthcoming about what they're experiencing? How am I building transparency and trustworthiness? A lot of times I've had to tell folks, the thing that you need, we actually don't provide it here, but I can help you find the person or connect you to the next person on that journey to get you closer to what you need. Being really honest about where you're at. So the safety and the trustworthiness part are two of the missed opportunities that I think as individuals and organizations that we can spend a little bit more time. Now, the 3 through 5 are areas that organizations work on, but we sometimes skip over the first two. And 6 is probably should be number 1, where we consider the whole person. What are some religious, spiritual, cultural practices that are important to the people who are coming to your organization? What is the historical context about how that person has interfaced with the system? These are ways that we can begin to educate ourselves when we know, and maybe you don't know that you don't know that much about that topic or that group of people that you're serving. That's okay to come from a humble approach to say, there's more I need to learn. So what can you do? What can you do to encourage a trauma-informed approach in your practice or in your role in your organization? One, take an honest assessment of yourself and your organization about where you stand on those principles. Man, have I really taken time to get to know my folks? Are there parts about their journey that I need to research more on? Is it my tone that I need to kind of tweak so that folks feel that I'm a safe person to come to? 2, I would say make a commitment to a trauma-informed care principle to practice. For example, I can choose cultural gender issues. As you know, I want to spend this year really learning about maybe some public policies that are impacting people that I didn't even know of, I wasn't aware of. Or I want to spend some time learning about the geriatric community and the way that technology is either hindering or hurting them, and being able to have direct conversations with people on how to enact change. So make a commitment. These are not things that you do once a year and you do a refresher. No, it's a lifelong commitment around how you will consider the whole person, because that is the one way that we can provide the highest quality of care in a way that builds resilience, not only within ourselves, but the people we're serving. And pretty straightforward. You can ask the person, do you feel that I heard all your needs correctly today? Is there anything that I missed? It's a question that we can ask folks because they are the center of their care. They are the experts of themselves. They house the next step that we are not, even though we're learned and experts and trained, that the folks we're serving are actually the experts of themselves. So we can ask them directly. Take action. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another to walk about it, right? Take action that is in line with a trauma-informed approach. And I know we covered a lot of information really quickly, but I want you to just check in with yourself right now. I know I'm here and won't hear your responses, but it's important that you have space and time to reflect on the information that you're absorbing. What are my immediate thoughts and feelings? What was my experience like listening to this talk? And how might I want to take action? So I want to thank you all for coming to my very quick talk on building resilience through a trauma-informed care approach. If you would like more information about how your organization may be able to do that in this coming year, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. My email, phone number is available here. You can find us on our website at urbanhealthgroupinc.org. We also have information on our Instagram, but the easiest way is just to give us a call or send a inquiry via email about how you can begin to take the first step. So we hope that you enjoy the rest of the symposium and the speaker to come to talk about their journey. But you really start ingesting the information to make it applicable for you. I wish you wellness. I wish you peace. I wish you love. And I hope you all take care of yourself.